She told me to wait by the gift table, away from the main guests. "Just stay there, Mom. We'll come get you when it's time for photos." But I could see it in her eyes she wasn't planning to come get me at all. She had no idea that 6 months from that moment, she'd be standing in a gallery, staring at my paintings, watching strangers bid thousands of dollars for my work. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The morning of Emily's wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m. Even though the ceremony wasn't until 3 in the afternoon, I'd barely slept. My late husband Robert's voice kept echoing in my head, something he used to say whenever I picked up a paintbrush. "Margaret, that's a nice hobby, but don't you think you should focus on real work?" Real work meant teaching, raising Emily, keeping the house spotless. Art was frivolous, a waste of time. Robert had been gone for 3 years now, and I'd spent most of that time feeling like a ghost in my own life. Emily had her career, her new relationship with David. She was busy. I understood that, but I'd hoped that her wedding would be different. I'd hoped I'd feel like I mattered again, at least for one day. I put on the dress I'd bought for the occasion, a simple navy blue dress, nothing fancy, but appropriate for a mother of the bride. I'd asked Emily if she wanted to go shopping together, but she'd said she was too busy with wedding planning. "Just get something nice, Mom. You know what looks good." I arrived at the venue 2 hours early. The place was beautiful, a historic mansion with gardens that seemed to go on forever. David's family had insisted on having the wedding there. They were from old money, the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and knew the right wine to order without looking at the menu. I found Emily in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids I'd never met. Her maid of honor was doing her makeup while 2 others fussed with her dress. "Mom!" Emily looked up, startled. "You're early. I wanted to see if you needed any help," I said, already feeling like I was intruding. "Oh, actually we've got everything covered here." She glanced at her bridesmaids, and I saw something pass between them. A look. "David's mom is downstairs if you want to say hello." David's mother, Patricia Rodriguez, was the kind of woman who wore pearls to brunch and had opinions about everything. I'd met her twice before, once at their engagement party and once at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Both times, she'd looked at me like I was a server she was about to send back to the kitchen. "Maybe I'll just wait outside," I said. "Actually, Mom, could you maybe just go downstairs to the main area? The photographer is coming soon and we need space to get ready." I felt something crack inside my chest, but I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. You look beautiful." I closed the door and stood in the hallway, listening to the laughter resume on the other side. One of the bridesmaids said something I couldn't quite hear, and they all giggled. I told myself they weren't laughing about me. I told myself a lot of things that day. Downstairs, I found a quiet corner near the gift table. I watched as guests began to arrive, David's friends, his family, his colleagues from the real estate firm. I recognized a few people from Emily's work, but they were all younger, dressed in expensive clothes, talking about restaurants I'd never been to and vacations I couldn't afford on my teacher's pension. I saw David arrive with his groomsmen. He was handsome in his tuxedo, I had to admit. I understood why Emily loved him. But as I watched him greet his guests, I noticed something. He had this way of sizing people up in an instant, deciding who was worth his time and who wasn't. I'd seen him do it before, but I'd told myself I was being paranoid. He saw me standing by the gift table and walked over. For a moment, I thought he was coming to say hello, to thank me for coming. Instead, he leaned in close and said, "Margaret, would you mind staying over here by the gifts? Patricia is worried about." Well, you know how people can be at weddings. Sticky fingers and all that. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'd feel so much better if someone responsible was keeping an eye on things. I understood immediately. He was giving me a job. A role. He was making sure I wouldn't mingle. Wouldn't embarrass them with the wrong people. "Of course," I heard myself say. "Great. Oh, and maybe after the ceremony, you could help direct people to their seats at the reception? The ushers are going to be busy with the important guests." The important guests? Not me. He patted my shoulder and walked away, and I stood there by that gift table, watching everyone else laugh and drink champagne and celebrate my daughter's wedding while I guarded the presents like hired security. The ceremony was beautiful. I watched from the back row as Emily walked down the aisle on her own. She decided not to have anyone give her away, said it was more modern that way. I wondered if she just didn't want me up there with her. Patricia sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. I stayed in the back, blinking hard to keep my own tears from falling. At the reception, I was given a seat at table 12, tucked away in the corner near the kitchen doors. The table was full of distant relatives and elderly neighbors I'd never met. The woman next to me was David's great-aunt, who was nearly deaf and kept asking me to pass the salt even though it was right in front of her. I watched Emily and David at the head table, surrounded by their wedding party. They looked so happy. I wanted to feel happy for them. I wanted to not feel this awful, gnawing sense that I was invisible. During the speeches, Patricia gave a toast that lasted 10 minutes, talking about how proud she was of David, how lucky Emily was to be joining their family. She mentioned family values, tradition, the Rodriguez legacy. She never once looked at me. When it was time for the mother-son dance, Patricia and David glided across the floor to some Frank Sinatra song while everyone watched and applauded. I kept waiting for someone to announce the mother-daughter dance, but it never came. I later learned that Emily had decided to skip it because, and I quote from what one of her bridesmaids told me, it just felt awkward with her mom. I left before the cake cutting. I told Emily I had a headache, which wasn't entirely a lie. She barely looked up from her conversation with David's cousins. "Oh, okay, Mom. Feel better. Thanks for coming." Thanks for coming. Like I was a coworker who'd stopped by out of obligation. I drove home in my 10-year-old Honda, still wearing my navy blue dress that suddenly felt too cheap, too plain, too much like everything I was. When I got home, I sat in my living room, the same living room where I'd raised Emily, where we'd had movie nights and homework sessions and endless conversations about her dreams, and I cried. Not the gentle, dignified crying of a proud mother. The ugly, gasping kind that shakes your whole body. I cried for the daughter I'd lost somewhere along the way. I cried for the marriage I'd spent 30 years in, where I'd put away every dream I'd ever had because Robert said they were impractical. I cried for myself, 61 years old and feeling like I'd wasted my entire life being what everyone else needed me to be. And then I stopped crying. I looked around my living room and saw Robert's furniture, Robert's books, Robert's choices everywhere. The only thing that was mine was a small watercolor painting hanging above the side table, something I'd done in college, before I'd met Robert, before I'd learned to make myself smaller. I stood up, walked to my closet, and pulled out the box I'd shoved in the back 3 years ago when Robert died. Inside were my old art supplies, tubes of paint, brushes, a sketchbook I'd started and never finished. I'd packed them away because looking at them hurt too much, reminded me of all the years I'd let slip past without creating anything. I opened the sketchbook and saw the drawing I'd started decades ago, a portrait of Emily as a little girl, laughing in our backyard. I'd never finished it. Robert had come home and said dinner wasn't ready, and I'd put it away and never picked it up again. That night, at 11 p.m., still wearing my wedding dress from my daughter's wedding, I set up an easel in my dining room and started to paint. I painted everything I'd been feeling. I painted the empty chair at the table where I'd sat alone. I painted the shadow of a woman standing in the corner of a bright room. I painted loneliness in shades of blue and gray that I didn't even know existed until they appeared on my canvas. I painted through the night. When the sun came up, I had finished something raw and honest and real. I looked at it and started to cry again, but this time it was different. This time, I was crying because I'd created something that mattered, at least to me. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop. I painted the morning light coming through my kitchen window. I painted my hands, weathered and age-spotted, holding a paintbrush. I painted the garden where Emily used to play, empty now, full of weeds I'd been meaning to pull for months. I painted because it was the only thing that made me feel alive. Emily called once in the next 2 weeks to tell me she and David were back from their honeymoon in Bali. "It was amazing, Mom. I'll show you pictures sometime." Sometime. Always sometime. I didn't tell her about the painting. I didn't tell anyone. It felt like a secret, something precious that was just mine. I started going to the art supply store in town, the one I'd walked past 100 times, but never entered. The woman who owned it, Sandra, was probably in her 40s, with paint stains on her jeans and gray streaking through her black hair. "First time?" she asked when I hesitated at the door. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. "You have the look." like you're about to do something you've wanted to do for a very long time but weren't allowed to. I bought more supplies that day than I could afford. Good brushes, quality paints, canvas. Sandra told me about a community art class that met on Thursday evenings, but I wasn't ready for that yet. This was still too raw, too personal, but I kept painting. 3, 4, 5 paintings a week. My dining room became a studio. I pushed Robert's furniture aside and didn't care that there were paint stains on the carpet. This was my space now. One Thursday, 6 weeks after the wedding, I was in the art store buying more titanium white when Sandra said, "You should really consider showing your work." I laughed. "I'm just an old woman with a hobby." "That's what you keep telling yourself." She leaned against the counter. "But I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can tell when someone has a real voice. You do. Have you ever thought about posting your work online? Online? Instagram. It's where artists share their work now. You could start an account, see what happens. I didn't even have Instagram. Emily had tried to explain it to me once, but I'd felt too old, too confused by all the apps and filters and hashtags. But that night, I figured it out. I set up an account. I called myself Margaret Paints because I couldn't think of anything clever, and I posted a photo of one of my paintings, the one of the empty chair at the dinner table. I wrote in the caption, 61 years old and finally brave enough to try. First painting in 30 years. I got 3 likes by the next morning, all from people I didn't know. One of them left a comment, "This is hauntingly beautiful. Please post more." So I did. I posted every few days, whenever I finished something I was proud of. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell anyone in my real life. This was my secret world, and slowly, it started to grow. By the end of the second month, I had 200 followers. By the third month, 500. People left comments that made me cry, telling me my work spoke to them, that they understood the loneliness and the late-blooming courage it represented. A woman in Seattle said my painting of weathered hands holding a paintbrush reminded her of her own mother, who'd given up her dreams to raise 6 children. A man in Austin said the empty chair painting was hanging above his desk, that he'd printed it out and framed it because it reminded him not to wait to live his life. I was connecting with strangers in a way I'd never connected with my own daughter. 4 months after the wedding, I got a message on Instagram from someone named Vivian Torres. She introduced herself as the owner of the Torres Gallery in downtown Philadelphia, about 40 minutes from where I lived. She said she'd been following my work and wanted to know if I'd be interested in being part of a group exhibition they were planning, Emerging Voices, Artists Over 50. I read the message 3 times before I believed it was real. I called Sandra at the art store, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Margaret, do you know what this means? The Torres Gallery is legitimate. This is huge." I met Vivian the following week. She was in her 30s, with bright red lipstick and an energy that made me feel both excited and exhausted. She walked through my dining room studio, looking at each painting with an intensity that made me nervous. "These are extraordinary," she finally said. "They're honest. That's what's missing in so much art today, genuine, unfiltered honesty." She turned to me. "I don't want you for the group show. I want to give you a solo exhibition." "A solo? 3 months from now. I'm thinking we call it something like Late Bloom or Finding Voice, or we'll figure out the title. But Margaret, I think you have something special here. Something people need to see." I wanted to say yes immediately. But then reality crashed in. "I don't have enough paintings for a solo show." "How many do you have? 15 maybe?" "I need at least 25. Can you do it?" Could I? I had 3 months. I'd been painting almost every day anyway. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Yes, I can do it." "Perfect. I'll draw up the paperwork. Oh, and Margaret, don't underprice yourself. I've seen artists your age sell themselves short because they don't believe they're worth it. You are." For the next 3 months, I painted like a woman possessed. I barely slept. I forgot to eat sometimes. Emily called once, maybe twice, and I kept the conversations short because I didn't want to lose my focus. I painted portraits of invisible women mothers at family gatherings who no one notices, older women on park benches feeding pigeons, a grandmother standing in the doorway of a party she's not really part of. I painted what I knew, and then I painted something else, hope, rebirth, A woman with silver hair, her back to the viewer, walking toward a bright doorway. A canvas covered in butterflies emerging from cocoons. Hands, weathered but strong, building something new. Vivian came by every few weeks to check on my progress. Each time, she got more excited. "Margaret, these are going to sell. I'm telling you, we need to price them between $5,000 and $8,000. $1,000? I choked. Who's going to pay that much for paintings by someone no one's ever heard of? People who recognize real talent. Trust me. The opening was scheduled for a Friday night in March. Vivian had sent out invitations, posted about it on social media, reached out to art critics and collectors. I'd invited Sandra from the art store, a few old colleagues from my teaching days, and my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who'd been bringing me casseroles and telling me how proud she was. I didn't invite Emily. I told myself it was because she was busy, because she wouldn't be interested. But the truth was, I was terrified she'd come and look at my paintings the same way she'd looked at me at her wedding, like I was something embarrassing, something to be managed. The morning of the opening, my phone rang. It was David. "Margaret, hi. Listen, I need to ask you a favor." It was the first time he'd called me since the wedding. "What is it?" "There's this property I'm showing tonight. Big potential sale. And the thing is, it's at the Torres Gallery downtown. They're selling the building, looking for the right buyer. The owner is some art dealer, I guess. Anyway, there's some kind of art show happening there tonight, which is actually perfect because it shows the space in use. I'm bringing Emily along because, she's better at the aesthetic stuff than I am. I was wondering if you could watch our dog for the evening?" I felt something shift in my chest. "You're going to the Torres Gallery tonight?" "Yeah, around 7. "Why?" "No reason. I can't watch the dog tonight. I have plans." "Oh. Okay, no problem. We'll figure something out." He hung up, and I sat there, staring at my phone. They were coming. Emily and David were coming to my show, and they had no idea it was my show. I called Vivian in a panic. "They're coming. My daughter and son-in-law are coming tonight." "That's great." "No. You don't understand. They don't know about the paintings. They don't know about any of this. David is a real estate agent, and he's showing you as a client. He's trying to sell you the building." There was a pause. "Oh." And then I heard her smile through the phone. "Oh, Margaret, this is perfect." "Perfect? It's a disaster." "No. Listen to me. This is your moment. You were invisible to them before. Now they're going to see you, really see you. And isn't that what you painted? Isn't that what all of these paintings are about?" She was right. I knew she was right. But I still felt like I was going to throw up. That evening, I put on a black dress I'd bought specifically for the opening, elegant, sophisticated, nothing like the navy blue dress I'd worn to the wedding. I styled my silver hair. I put on lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Sandra drove me to the gallery. My hands were shaking the entire way. The gallery was already filling up when we arrived. Vivian had transformed the space. My paintings lined the white walls, each one lit perfectly, with small placards beside them. There were servers walking around with wine and hors d'oeuvres. Classical music played softly in the background. "Margaret!" Vivian rushed over and hugged me. "Look at this turnout! We already have serious interest in 3 pieces." I couldn't process what she was saying. I was too busy scanning the room for Emily and David. And then I saw them walk in. David was in a suit, looking very much like a real estate agent about to make a sale. Emily was beside him in a cream-colored dress, her hair pulled back. They were laughing about something, probably something David had said. They looked like they belonged here, in this elegant space, in a way I'd spent my whole life believing I didn't. I watched as David approached Vivian. She was talking to an older couple, but she turned when he introduced himself. "David Rodriguez, Martinez Real Estate. We spoke on the phone about the property?" "Oh, yes. Of course. I'm Vivian Torres." She shook his hand, then Emily's. "And you must be?" "Emily Rodriguez, his wife. I'm here for moral support and to tell him if he's making a terrible decision." She smiled, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who laughed in our backyard. "Well, you picked a good night to visit. We're having our opening reception for a new exhibition." Vivian gestured to the walls. "Feel free to look around while I finish up with these clients." and then we can talk about the space. I watched David and Emily start to circle the room, looking at paintings without really seeing them. They were here for business. The art was just backdrop. David said something to Emily, and she nodded. They were probably talking about square footage and ceiling height and commercial potential. They stopped in front of one of my paintings, the empty chair at the dinner table. I saw Emily tilt her head, studying it. She said something to David, and he shrugged, pulling out his phone. But Emily stayed there, looking at the painting. She took a step closer. She read the placard beside it, where Vivian had printed the title, The Invisible Guest. I saw her face change. She moved to the next painting, the woman in the corner, then to the next, weathered hands, new creation. She grabbed David's arm. He looked up from his phone, annoyed at first, and then confused. She was pointing at something on the placard. I knew what she'd seen, the artist's name, Margaret Chen. I watched my daughter put the pieces together. I watched her face go pale. I watched her turn, scanning the room until her eyes found mine. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the gallery. Then she walked toward me. David followed, looking confused. People moved out of her way, sensing something significant was happening. "Mom?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Did you? I painted them. My voice was steady, steadier than I expected. All of them. But you don't. I mean, when did you? After your wedding. I let that sink in. I went home that night and I started painting. I haven't really stopped since. David was looking around the gallery with a new expression, reassessing, calculating. These are actually pretty good. Emily shot him a look that could melt steel. David, could you give us a minute? He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. Emily turned back to me, and I saw tears in her eyes. The empty chair. That's from the wedding, isn't it? Table 12. I nodded. Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I was so caught up in everything, and David's family had all these opinions, and I just wanted everything to be perfect. I didn't see that I was pushing you out. You did more than push me out, Emily. You made me invisible. Your own mother. And you treated me like I was hired help. I know. The tears were falling now. I know, and I can't take it back. But Mom, these paintings, they're incredible. How did I not know you could do this? Because you never asked. Neither did your father. I spent 30 years being what everyone else needed me to be. A good wife, a good mother, a good teacher. I put away everything that made me me because I was told that's what good women do. Emily looked around the gallery, at all the people admiring my work. How long have you been doing this? 6 months. That's all. 6 months of finally being brave enough to try. Vivian appeared beside us, her gallery owner's smile firmly in place. Emily, I presume? I'm Vivian Torres. Your mother is extraordinarily talented. We've already had 2 serious offers tonight, both above asking price. Above asking price? Emily looked stunned. How much are you selling them for? Between $5,000 and $8,000, depending on the size and complexity. I watched David's head snap up from across the room where he'd been pretending to look at his phone. Emily turned to me, her mouth open. Mom, that's incredible. It's not about the money, I said quietly. Though I won't pretend the money doesn't help. It's about finally doing something that's mine. Finally being seen for who I am. Not who everyone needed me to be. I see you, Emily whispered. I'm looking right at you. And I see you. And Mom, I'm so sorry I didn't before. We stood there in the middle of the gallery, my daughter and I. And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt like she was really looking at me. This one, Emily said, pointing to the portrait of the little girl laughing in the backyard, the one I'd started decades ago and finally finished 3 months ago. This is me, isn't it? When you were 7. I started it when your father was still alive, but I never finished it. I was always too busy with real work. This is real work, Mom. This is more real than anything I've seen in years. She turned to Vivian. Is this one sold? Not yet, but we've had interest. I want to buy it. Whatever the asking price is, I want to buy it and hang it in my house where I can see it every day and remember that I almost missed this, that I almost missed you. I felt something crack open in my chest, but this time it wasn't breaking, it was opening. making room for something new. You don't have to buy it, I said. I'll give it to you. No. Emily shook her head firmly. No, Mom. This is your work, your art. You've spent your whole life giving everything away for free. Not anymore. I'm buying it. I'm going to pay full price, and I'm going to be proud of it, and when people come to my house and ask about it, I'm going to tell them my mother painted it. My mother, who's more talented and brave than I ever gave her credit for. David had walked back over, and he was looking at me with new eyes. The assessment of a real estate agent, yes, but something else too. Maybe a little bit of respect. Margaret, I owe you an apology. You owe me more than that. He flinched, but nodded. You're right, I do. I treated you terribly at the wedding. I was so worried about impressing my family, about everything being perfect, that I didn't think about how it would feel for you. That was wrong. It was. These paintings, though, they're really good. And I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to get back in your good graces. I mean it. Thank you, I said. Because what else do you say? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Collectors came and went, expressing interest, making offers. By the end of the night, 17 of my 25 paintings had sold. Vivian was beaming. Sandra was crying. Mrs. Patterson was telling everyone who would listen that she'd known I was special all along. Emily stayed by my side the whole time, watching people react to my work, listening to their comments. At one point, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Before they left, Emily pulled me aside. "Can I take you to lunch next week? Just us?" "No, David. No phones. No distractions. I want to hear about all of this. How you started? What inspired each painting? Everything." "I'd like that. And Mom? Would you maybe teach me? I used to love drawing when I was little, but I stopped. I don't even remember why I stopped." "I remember why. You wanted to apply to art school, and your father and I. Your father said it wasn't practical, that you should study business instead. I went along with it because that's what I always did. I let him convince me, and then I helped him convince you." Emily's eyes filled with tears again. I'd forgotten about that. I hadn't. I've spent 6 months painting about all the things I tried to forget. Will you teach me, though? Even after everything? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, the way she was finally looking at me, and I saw past the polished marketing executive to the little girl who used to bring me drawings of flowers and unicorns, who had a sketchbook under her bed, and dreams she'd buried somewhere along the way. "Yes," I said. "I'll teach you." 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Emily showed up at my house with a set of beginner's paints and canvases. We set up easels in my dining room, which I was now officially calling my studio, and I taught her how to mix colors, how to see light and shadow, how to trust her instincts. She was terrible at first, which made her laugh. "I forgot how hard this is. It's not about being good," I told her. "It's about being honest. Paint what you feel, not what you think you should feel." She painted a garden overgrown, wild, full of weeds and flowers tangled together. When she was done, she stepped back and stared at it. "It's a mess," she said. "It's beautiful. It's both, isn't it? Most things are." We started meeting every Saturday. Sometimes we painted together. Sometimes we just talked. She told me about the pressure she felt at work, about how David's family had expectations she wasn't sure she could meet, about how she'd lost herself somewhere in trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect everything. "I learned from the best," she said, not unkindly. "You did it for 30 years, and look where it got me. Don't make the same mistake, Emily. Don't wait until you're 61 to find your voice." 3 months after my show, Vivian called. "Margaret, I have news. There's an art critic who came to your opening, Bernard Williams from Art Forum. He's writing a feature on late-blooming artists, and he wants to include you. They want to photograph you in your studio and do a full interview." "A feature? In Art Forum?" The piece is called "It's Never Too Late, Artists Who Found Their Voice After 60. You're going to be the cover story." I had to sit down. The interview happened in May. Bernard Williams was in his 50s, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose and a genuine enthusiasm that put me at ease. He asked about my life, my late start, what inspired me to finally pursue art. "What made you brave enough?" he asked. I thought about that night after Emily's wedding, the navy blue dress, the empty chair, the feeling of being invisible. I wasn't brave, I told him. I was desperate. There's a difference. I was desperate to feel like I mattered, like I was more than just a supporting character in everyone else's story. Art gave me that. It gave me a voice when I'd spent decades being silent. And what would you say to other people who feel it's too late to start? That 61 is not too late. 70 is not too late. 80 is not too late. The only thing that's too late is never starting at all. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I spent 30 years telling myself that art was a luxury I couldn't afford, that it was selfish to want something just for me. And then I realized that the most selfish thing I'd done was waste decades of my life not trying. Not because I owed it to the world, but because I owed it to myself. The article came out in September. My phone didn't stop ringing for a week. Galleries wanted to show my work. Collectors wanted to commission pieces. A publisher reached out about a book, a memoir with illustrations of my paintings. Emily framed the magazine cover and hung it in her living room, right above the painting she'd bought at my opening. When I visited for dinner, regular dinners now, every other week I saw that she'd started hanging her own paintings too. They weren't technically perfect, but they were honest. David's mother came by last week, Emily told me over coffee. She saw the paintings and asked if I'd bought them from some gallery. When I told her I'd painted them and that you'd taught me, she got very quiet. What did she say? She asked if you'd teach her too. I nearly spit out my coffee. Patricia wants to learn to paint? Apparently she studied art history in college and always wanted to try painting herself, but her husband thought it was inappropriate. He's been gone for 5 years now, and she said seeing my paintings made her realize she's been waiting for permission that's never going to come. So now, on Sunday afternoons, I teach a small class in my studio. Emily, Patricia, Sandra from the art store, and 3 other women I've met along the way, all of us over 50, all of us finally brave enough or desperate enough or tired enough of waiting to try. We paint what we know. We paint what we feel. We paint the lives we've lived and the lives we want to live. We paint the parts of ourselves we've kept hidden and the parts we're just discovering. Last month, on what would have been my 33rd wedding anniversary, I took down the last of Robert's furniture and paintings. I repainted the walls of my house colors he would have hated, bright and bold and alive. I hung my own paintings everywhere. This is my space now. Finally, completely mine. Emily came by while I was redecorating. She helped me hang a piece I'd just finished, a self-portrait. An older woman with silver hair, holding a paintbrush, looking directly at the viewer, looking confident, looking seen. You know what's funny? Emily said as we stepped back to admire it. I spent so many years trying not to become you, trying to be more successful, more sophisticated, more everything. And now all I want is to be like you. Emily. No, I mean it. You started over at 61. You found yourself when most people have given up trying. You turned pain into art and invisibility into a voice that thousands of people want to hear. That's not something to run from, Mom. That's something to aspire to. I hugged my daughter, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like maybe I'd done something right. Maybe the years of being invisible, the years of putting everyone else first, maybe they weren't wasted. Maybe they were just the before in a story that was still being written. Thank you, I whispered. For what? For finally seeing me, for pushing me to see myself. She pulled back and looked at me, really looked at me, the way she'd been doing more and more often lately. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I didn't see you at the wedding. I'm sorry I didn't see you for years before that. It's okay. It's not, but I'm grateful you're giving me the chance to do better. That night, after Emily left, I stood in my studio, surrounded by paintings and half-finished canvases and tubes of paint and brushes and jars of water. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, invisible, forgotten, convinced her life was essentially over. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, an artist, a teacher, someone with a voice that mattered. It wasn't too late. It had never been too late. I picked up a brush, selected a fresh canvas, and began to paint.